Good morning. It's Saturday, June 22nd. And this morning I want to talk about something that I have talked about in the past. It deals with campaign funding. Deals with about 34 countries that are in our category, democracies of some kind or other. I don't want to talk about the dictatorship or the other nations in the world. I want to talk about the democracy. And in these democracies, we lead them by a ton in the spending on political campaigns. Most of the other democracies have some form of control over political contributions and the amount of time that is given to campaigning. When we look at our campaign situation, and I see that there are people and organizations that are donating millions, not a couple of million, millions, 50 million, 60 million, $70 million to the campaigns of the candidates. And it's an ongoing situation. They don't stop contributing. And President Obama spent $700 million to get himself reelected. Now, I would think once you're the president, you don't need to spend that kind of money to get reelected. But we are insane in this country about the amount of money that we are allowed to spend on campaigns. Now, many of these other countries have a campaign limit on what a person can contribute. And the other important thing is the amount of time that you can spend campaigning. In the United States, the minute you're elected, you go back on the campaign trail. So when I look at this and I see the different categories that these other democratic nations fall into, it's amazing. There are no limit nations. Nations like Australia and Norway and Spain and Sweden, they have no limits on contributions. And they have no limits on what the campaigns can spend. But that doesn't mean these people are writing million-euro checks and etc. They determine how to spend that money by multiple factors. And those factors are ways to hold down the contributions and the spending. Even though the law doesn't in those nations impose limits, most of those nations have a tradition of stricter party discipline than we do. And so they don't let their people go crazy and spend millions of dollars. And they don't have campaigns that lasts forever, okay? Then there are nations that have limits on spending, but not limits on donations. You see, you got a two-pronged weapon. There's the spending, and there's the amount that's given. So while somebody can give you $1 million, you might not be allowed to spend more than $500,000 or something like that. So if you have a limit on what a parliamentary candidate can spend, but no limit on what somebody can donate, it doesn't really matter, because if she can get $50,000, it doesn't matter if she's only allowed to spend $20,000. So there are various ways that this whole thing about campaign spending can be and when you look at the list of nations, none of them is like us. None of them is free for all. Spend as much as you want. Collect as much as you want, campaign as long as you want. That doesn't exist in these other countries. Now, the United States and Finland are the only countries that have contribution limits, but no spending limits. So American candidates have the worst of both worlds. They have a lack of spending limits, and they're always in the risk of being outspent by some candidates, which means they can never ever stop raising money. But the lack of contribution limits mean that they have to get that money in limited segments. And the limited segment size is like $2,600 or something like that. So they have to keep asking and asking and asking for money. And many of these countries not only have limits on the money that they collect and the spending habits, they have a limit on the campaign time. In Germany, there's a 6-week campaign period. And not only is there a 6-week campaign period, but depending on the office that you run for, you're allowed a certain amount of TV time. So if you're running for some minor office, you might only be allowed to get on television 2 or 3 times. But if you're running for some major office, you might be allowed to be on television 10 times. Could you imagine if we limited our candidates to a certain amount of time? How wonderful would that be for the rest of us? How wonderful would it be for the United States to limit the amount of money that they allow them to spend on campaigns? Does being a free society mean that you can just go crazy and spend tons and tons of money? Wouldn't it be much nicer if these people who give $50 million at a clip to a given campaign group, wouldn't it be nice if those people spent money like that on education, on health? Why? Why should a presidential candidate who's already in office and running for a second term be spending $700 million to get reelected? Isn't that a form of insanity? There should be limits, and there should be limits on the time you can campaign, too. It would be wonderful if every category, like a seat in the Senate costs X, and a seat in Congress costs Y, and the president's costs X. That would be a wonderful way to control our elections. And we'd only have, say, a 1-month campaign cycle. So we didn't have to listen to this bullshit for 4 years every time we need to go to a re-election. So we need to do something that gets us in a better shape. And we have to stop pissing money away. Because all of this extra money that is being contributed to campaigns might be contributed to something a lot more useful. I'll leave you with that. Our campaign funding and our campaign criteria are a total mess. Have a great day. Bye.